Hello, Athlete Mindset community. This is Lisa Bonta Sumii, the host of Athlete Mindset. Before we dive into this episode, I want to invite you to support the mission and purpose of our show. For $10 a month, you can help to make sure these conversations get to as many athletes, teams, coaches, and sport mental health environments as possible. As a subscriber, you will receive exclusive content and updates on current topics in athlete mental health, and you'll be directly contributing to the betterment of mental health for all athletes. Join the cause. Subscribe at sportse.io/athlete and make a difference today. Again, that's sportse.io/athlete. With your support and amplification, we can ensure more voices are heard and more individuals and communities are positively impacted.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mental Health Training Room. As I am excited for every episode, but this one has a lot more excitement to it. Today, we have Lisa Bonta Sumii on the episode. She is a licensed clinical social worker, a mental performance consultant, the first ever mental health and performance coach for the Oakland Roots Sport Club, which is a men's professional soccer team. She's also the host of her own podcast called the AthMindset podcast. And she owns her own business called AthMindset, which is a team of clinicians that work strictly with athletes on and off the field or court. Lisa works with elite youth athletes, collegiate student athletes, Olympians/Olympic hopefuls, professional athletes, coaches, teams, and basically the entire sport community, which is so awesome. So as you can tell, Lisa's making a huge impact on the sports community. And I'm personally very inspired by her work. Speaking from a clinician's point of view, but also as a former athlete, I just wish that these services were more widely marketed to athletes and provided to student athletes, because as we both know, and as I'm sure all the listeners know, it's very important. But hopefully after this episode, some more eyes will be open to the work that you're doing and more people can get connected with you. So thank you so much, Lisa, for being here.
Oh, thank you, Haley. This is going to be fun. I'm excited to just kind of sit down and have a little chat and bring some knowledge and awareness to the mental health space. I think one thing that's important to know is AthMindset is a team of clinicians, but also certified mental performance consultants. And we can kind of talk about the difference as our conversation goes on if we get there. But yeah, I'm excited to just, spend some time with you.
Yeah, I would love to share that difference on this episode, and we can kind of start off with that. So how did AthMindset kind of come to be? And then, if you want to go a little bit more into the CMPC versus clinician, feel free to
Yeah, totally. So AthMindset was birthed during the pandemic and as a response to need based on, a lot of the mental health struggles that our society, as well as athletes, coaches, and members of the sport community and ecosystem were going through at that time. My colleagues and I all know that the mental health sort of repercussions of going through the pandemic are going to last generations, much longer than the physical sort of complications that come from it. And so we're ready to address those needs as they come. That time, working with the Roots, a lot of parents, other aged athletes, so in the youth and collegiate space, we're reaching out and saying, gosh, I see you're doing this amazing work with the Roots. Can you do some with my family or my kid or my school? And I'm like, oh gosh, there's a huge need out there that's growing. And it is I feel like purpose and duty to figure out how to respond to that need. And so I built AthMindset. I can't do the work alone. Don't want to, not as fun. I'm only one person. And so I built this team of clinicians, licensed mental health clinicians in different professions. Like there's the licensed professional counselor, there's the marriage family therapist, there's a licensed clinical social worker, there's a psychologist. So any of those professions pursuing their license and have an interest, lived experience, and specific training working with athletes can be a part of AthMindset, as well as mental performance consultants who are in the process of pursuing their certification through the Association for Applied Sports Psychology, are also part of the team, and we do workshops, direct clinical services, provide, you know, practitioners who look like people all across the diverse continuum of our human existence, across the brown, black, continuum as well. And so we're that team. And I think the difference between the licensed mental health clinician and the mental performance consultant is just how they work to optimize the mental health of a human being who happens to like show up in the space of sports. So licensed clinician is a healthcare provider. We are providers that can bill insurance because we fall in that area. We're grounded in ethics and laws and theoretical perspectives. We have education and training to prevent and treat mental health conditions. We use specific modalities and strategies and techniques to do so. We create treatment plans. We diagnose if needed and can provide resources and referrals. So there's the whole gamut there. Mm-hmm. And can dive into like trauma and childhood experiences and go on a deeper level there, can help people recover from trauma, things like that. So, and then the mental performance coach also has ethics, theories. They're not considered a mental health provider or a healthcare provider for that matter, but help with mental performance on their field of play. Mm-hmm. So some athletes can have one of each.
Yeah.
Their team alongside their athletic trainer, alongside chiropractor, et cetera. So it just depends on the athlete, the team, what they're looking for, what they need. But the mental performance coach, is or consultant, they're synonymous, on the field of play, lightweight, some counseling, but not in depth. Right. And sometimes that's what an athlete is looking for or needing. Like they don't need to go or want to go in depth or aren't identifying that. They just want to deal with performance anxiety on the field. They want to deal with how to set some goals, how to manage their emotions in high stress moments. And so it depends on what the need of the athlete is or the team or the coach, and then making sure that the service provides and meets that need.
Yeah. I love how you said when you're talking about your team of clinicians from AthMindset, talking about like the mental health, like the healthcare part of it, how those clinicians, how you require them to have like some sort of like sports training or lived experience within the sports world, because I feel like that's a huge, maybe stigma could be the word, around mental health with athletes. It's like they just don't get it. Like they don't get what we're going through. Like, why is talking to someone going to help? And I think that it's such an important aspect to have when working with athletes, because it is such a niche lifestyle. And it's something that like I remember I had a therapist at the beginning of my college career, like, why don't you just quit? And I was like, no, that's like not, like, I understand how an outside perspective, like, this is stressing me out. I have so much going on. And like an outside perspective be like, oh, just like, why are you doing that to yourself? Just quit. But like, obviously as athletes, we know that it's not that easy. So being able to like really sit in it with that athlete. And if it obviously does get to the point where it's like very toxic for them, then maybe you could talk about like, okay, maybe we can transition or transfer or something. But it's like, it's not something where athletes, we just want to quit. Like that's not really.
Totally. And you're not the first person who's told me that as a current or former athlete, that's been the guidance. It's like working with athletes is a specific expertise and area of specialty. Just like working with children or working with the elderly or working with the autistic population. You need to know the ins and outs of that population to be able to guide how you intervene and the ways that you are able to explore options. It's not the first go-to to quit. It just isn't. I mean, high-performing athletes don't ever want to quit in whatever they do, right? Right or wrong, but like that's not a sort of informed approach, And I want to share that my CMPCs and those pursuing the CMPC are also former athletes. A lot of times have a passion to serve the population, have lived experience, and that is the passion point, but alone does not equip them to serve the athlete population, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We still need the training. We still need the education. We still need the applied training and work to actually fine tune and be an ethical and competent practitioner in the field. So I just want to make that clear too. But that the passion comes from a lived experience, just again, like with any other population. Someone who like maybe specializes, again, I'll use the autistic spectrum of folks, might have a special interest in that because their child is autistic or they have done already some applied work in that population that sparks a passion.
Exactly.
They'll actually deepen that specialty and then kind of present themselves as a area of expert in that. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a really cool aspect of AthMindset, which is something that we've talked about off the episode, but it kind of started as well from seeing your daughter perform at a very high level and kind of noticing you were already a clinician, having background working in the prison system and other areas of mental health, but then seeing how that work applies to athletes as well, and seeing that from your daughter and kind of wanting to step in because you realize that there was not many resources out there for athletes. So being able to create this from seeing what your daughter experienced is also very inspiring. And I think coming at it from like, you're a parent and you're a clinician and you're putting it together and it's like the best of both sides. So I think
thanks for that. Like, yeah, I was a competitive athlete as well. So all the different perspectives that I hold. So my experience with my daughter is actually what shifted me personally in my work to start to learn more and specialize and actually pursue my CMPC because of her from an individual standpoint.
Yes.
As I was able to kind of do that and go through that work and then be very sort of steadfast in, I want to go back and get this specific training from a performance standpoint to marry with my clinical training. That happened first, and then AthMindset, which is building the team. And AthMindset is a business. So the business side of things, creating our business model, like all that stuff.
They don't teach us that in grad school.
No, they do not. I wish they did. And you know, that is something that I offer, you know, in my sort of consultation group that we offer every month. We talk about the business. I bring in my business strategic partners, talk about that side and to offer that kind of work. So anyway, we're going off on a little bit of a tangent, but I want to really differentiate my personal journey in what motivated me, inspired me to branch out and kind of bring in the performance side, the clinical side, then led to AthMindset, because that's a whole nother venture. My husband is also a licensed marriage family therapist, so he's a healthcare provider as well, has a history, lived experience in sports, is my COO. So like together, we built this thing with consulting lawyers and business specialists and blah, 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 all this stuff. It's like, what? You're blowing my head off right now. But like, just to change my expertise is one thing, but to build a business and then want to develop my team as well as make sure that we're serving the populations the best way we can is like a whole nother chapter and step. But saying that, like, I'm ready for doing it and want to keep doing it. So
that's awesome. Well, it's very much needed. And kind of going off of that, so what would you say, why do you think it's so important for athletes to be aware of their mental health?
Well, no, it's a great question. I think that at this time with athletes in sort of public facing platforms are using their sort of image and name to start to talk about it. The way I talk about it alongside them is that physical health and mental health coincide. They impact each other. And that mental health is health, just like physical health. And so I think there's so much stigma in our society, in this country and other countries for different reasons, and same about what it means. I think we've talked about it over the generations that mental health is the same as mental illness. And so we're not even going to go there then, because I don't want to be seen as quote unquote crazy or weak or like psychotic or whatever. That it's important to know the difference between mental health and mental illness, and that a mental health provider can differentiate that for you and diagnose it properly again if needed. But mental illness is when whatever is going on for you affects other areas of your life.
Yeah.
That there's a certain amount of like symptoms and signs and criteria that are met to diagnose you with the mental health condition, just like you would diabetes, just like you would cancer. There's special things that you look at, right? and then putting together a treatment model, but you can still thrive within a diagnosis.
Right.
So the difference in some mental health, we all have it. Every human being has mental health, just like we have physical health. We live on a continuum of how healthy we are and how healthy we feel from day to day, week to week, month to month. And our mental health is determined by how we respond to stress and adversity, our social support system, how we cope, things like that. And then mental illnesses, it gets so severe or like intense that we can't do that without some more intense intervention, sometimes even medication.
Yeah. I think that's great that you made that point of the distinction between the both, because I can remember when I was a freshman in college and I was like, oh, like just mentioned something about like I am in therapy or something, like very casual to me because I grew up with mental health being like at the forefront of like our existence, which I'm very grateful for. And I know that is not the same for a lot of families. But I had just like mentioned that and my teammates were like, oh, like what's wrong with you? Like
Yeah.
I was like, oh no. I was like, I mean, I have like anxiety, but like nothing's like wrong per se. So that was interesting to kind of be like, oh, that's kind of an outsider's view for someone who might not be as like well informed about what therapy is or what mental health treatment is. Like, yeah, you don't have to go if you have like a very severe diagnosis. Like you don't have to have a diagnosis at all if you need someone to talk to kind of keep that like something we say in grad school a lot is like mental health maintenance, like just up to date on your mental health and just being there to have that space in case of emergency.
I think that a lot too with the collegiate athletes I work with, they want to talk about someone who's not their parent.
Yeah.
Or a different view from what their teammate or friend might.
Yeah.
Because the parent, and I am one, is going to like fight for them, right? And be like, you're always right most of the time. And like, if you're messing with my kid, like, come on, but the therapist is going to be objective, bring a perspective, less emotionally connected to it, and just have a different kind of conversation.
Yeah.
And to your point, you don't have to have a diagnosis for something wrong per se. We can take it from a preventative standpoint. Again,
exactly.
physical health, right? We want to prevent and like just give someone to explore and to sort. Like I go to a chiropractor, I don't have an issue, but damn, I love how it feels.
Yeah.
And like, gosh darn it, that is part of like my physical and mental health routine.
Yeah.
It's the same way. Like, gosh, a place where I don't have to take care of the other person in the conversation or beyond, a place where I can just focus on me and like get perspectives and explore some things that maybe I feel shy or nervous about with other people. I feel like everyone should at least try like maybe 3 or 4 sessions in their life at one point just to check it out.
Yeah.
Just see. Athlete or no,
Right. Yeah, we're talking specifically to athlete population, but this can apply to anyone. But that kind of brings me into another topic I want to talk to you about is, so a little background on me is why I wanted to get into like the MFT side, marriage and family therapy side of things, is because I have a strong belief of like a holistic approach when working with athletes, not just if I were to go into like sports psych, that would just be focusing on performance. Kind of like you were saying about the CMPC, like there's not much like in-depth like trauma work you could do. So that's saying that like my sport is my therapy or like the gym is my therapy or whatever. To an extent, yes. But I'm also a believer of like, you kind of got to get your stuff figured out off of the court or off of the field in order to kind of to be able to kind of like zone out on the court or during the game, during practice, whatever it might be. So I just want to kind of get your thought on that and like, what is your take on that and any thoughts you might have?
I mean, I think the word therapy has become like a colloquialism, like lowercase t, therapy, it's all across social media. The young bucks are like, yeah, therapy, hashtag is my life or whatever, or hashtag I love my therapist or whatever, or food is my therapy, or like climbing is my therapy, or like, I think it's worth taking a deeper dive into it, that I think those things, my sport or the gym, can be therapeutic for me.
Yeah.
They can be therapeutic. Just like for me, getting a massage. Very therapeutic. Hugging my kid, and kissing on his little neck is therapeutic.
Yeah.
Like, so therapeutic means it provides a healing and a nice space, a place to be me. Like everyone's going to have a subjective definition of what is therapeutic for them. Like, I love me a pedicure, but some of my girlfriends like, I don't want nobody touching my feet.
Yeah.
So it's therapeutic for them. You know what I mean? So finding out what works for you. And then the other side of it is like, don't dumb down my profession to the gym.
Right. Right. The gym is not doing what we're doing.
The gym is not guided, like I said before, specific training and education and applied work and internships and things like that. But I don't think people mean that.
Yeah.
But just like I think that the difference between what is therapy and what you get from a therapy relationship and engaging in your own therapy is different than going to the gym, but both are beneficial.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. The sport, like me growing up, soccer was my safe space.
Yeah.
I didn't have to think about all the stresses of life. I could go out there and do my thing. My role was clear. What I did was clear. I was out there with all my best friends. It was very therapeutic.
Yeah.
And so just knowing the difference as we build awareness and understanding and education around what therapy is, what it isn't, what it can be, just the general pop kind of like throwing it around, just like depression is sometimes thrown around lowercase d, as you know. But that is a very,
all of that.
Yeah, these are real diagnoses and people deal with real things within these diagnoses. And so just having some awareness and respect and some sensitivity about those who might be going through things, it's important to know. But I think, again, I don't think people mean any harm. I'm saying gym is my therapy. That makes me feel good. Like, sweet, do those things.
Yeah. And I just want to name too, like how the part that you mentioned of like soccer was your safe space. Like you don't have to think about anything. And I think that's the same for a lot of athletes. But like also, how much easier is it to just like shut your brain off when you already are dealing with the things that you like want to shut it off from? So like I can remember one of my teammates one time was like going through some family stuff and like it was really hard on her and she was having troubles then on the court. And one might say like taking it then out of that situation, but like just using that as an example, like one might say that, okay, I need to go see a sports psychologist to figure out my performance and like to help me with getting my groove back, getting back in my zone, which totally, yes. But also how much is that going to help if you're still stressed out and worried about like the things off the court that you're not dealing with? So being able to just like implement that and being able to use your therapeutic space as an actual therapeutic space because you're getting your, for lack of a better term, shit together off the court or off the field, whatever it might be.
Yes. I think that there's some of us who are duly trained who do both. And I think there's no right or wrong. It's maybe prioritizing.
Right.
So maybe that person realizes, or this athlete in this case realizes that there are family issues at home, which are hard to deal with. But like, I want to feel confident and like maybe approach how I perform in my sport first as like an entry point to talking more deeply. Because the NPCs, we are trained in counseling techniques. We can talk about what's currently going on.
Yeah.
And a lot of CMPCs do and can and are very good at it.
Yeah.
If it becomes a deeper issue, like we've talked about before, that's beyond the moment, beyond the current, then that's where we can maybe have a strong referral base of clinicians who can then work in tandem with us or do a few sessions or we take breaks or whatever, like a little bit of work here on the performance side, a little bit work on the deeper side to also give the athlete time to sort of in sort of coaching terms, like periodize what they're working on. So it's not so intense is a way to sort of be creative about it. Because a lot of times I find in my work, the entry point is a little bit less threatening or more palpable to be able to go in from the performance side first, especially for young men, which is interesting. I found that then sometimes it can lead to a deeper discussion once trust and rapport is built and there's some success they're feeling on their field of play. So there's sort of a craft and a science and a nuancy way of like being able to pull from both professions when the condition or the situation pulls for it and wherever the athlete is at that time.
And that comes back to the holistic approach. Like we're not just seeing one issue or just treating it as like a one size fits all. Like there's different approaches to take with every human, every athlete. And I think that's extremely.
Yeah. And the clinical side and the performance side together both help build up mental health, mental fortitude, mental, stamina.
Yeah.
They put together just in different ways.
Yeah. And just also, it just reminds me of like how I coach a high school basketball team. I'm always like, even if you don't want to play this in college, like you're learning so much from sports. So I think that just goes back to as like sports just being a metaphor. Like, okay, oh, I saw how that worked for me on the court. I wonder what it would be like if I use that in my relationship or whatever it might be. So that's just going back to like sports just being so powerful in someone's life.
For sure. For sure. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So when it comes to working with athletes, I'm sure there's so many challenges that you come across, but if there's just like a couple that you could kind of name, like what would the biggest challenges be that you see working with these athletes and how do you support them through that?
Yeah. Are you talking like clinical presentations or?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking, that and like in a way that like us talking about it could kind of help people listening if they are going through the same thing as well.
Yeah. I mean, so when we talk about the clinical side, that's the sort of mental health, clinical side, sort of like depression, anxiety, grief,
Mhm.
eating disorder or disordered eating of some way. These are clinical issues that, if not addressed, can become more serious and more debilitating in life, not just your sport. So I did a recent post on IG about some of the themes of the recent weeks that I've been working with, and grief is a big one.
Mm.
Grief, losses, losses of my ability to play, like in an injury. That loss and the process of that is grief. Just like if you lose a family member or a pet, you go through the same stages of grief when you lose your ability to play.
Absolutely.
And so losses like an injury, losses like, it just breaks my heart to even share, but like of a child, of a grandparent,
Mm.
a sibling, a parent. There's a lot of, deaths happening.
Yeah.
Loss by suicide,
Mm.
a teammate or family member. So right now, like the deeper issues that I'm talking about as a therapist with my athletes are along these lines. And that just because we see them out there performing and on ESPN Plus or posting positive and cool results from their games doesn't mean there's not stuff going on with them underneath that we may never know about. And they still struggle with talking about it, even to a professional, because there's shame and embarrassment. And I should be dealing with this better. And like, am I actually weak? Like, am I doing the right thing? It's so hard. And I think people not knowing what's really going on underneath that uniform, underneath that number is just important, that they're humans, they're dealing with the human experience, which includes all of this stuff. Breakups, that's another loss. That's a big one too.
Yeah.
Athletes breaking up with their partners or who they're dating can just bring up so many deeper issues around relationships, about attachment, love, feelings of rejection, things like that. So those are some of the themes that I've been working with as of late with some of my athletes.
Yeah. That's such heavy stuff. And I feel like there is so much loss within that comes with being an athlete, whether it is death, like you're saying, or if it's like a loss of, I'm just even thinking back to like the transition from high school to college, like kind of, this is on a way less like severe level, but it's still some form of loss, like a loss of like being around your family and like an everyday type of thing, or like a loss of like the normal that you've had for such a long time, the loss of like a social life in a sense.
Totally.
Yeah. And like even the loss of some relationships, whether or not it's like a permanent loss, but like I know that I had not by choice, but like I kind of had to stop a lot of like put a pause on like a lot of the friendships that I had because I didn't have time to like keep up with people who weren't in my daily routine. So that is so important that you mentioned that, and just realizing that these athletes are going through so much. And going back to kind of how you brought up like the NIL perspective, like that just adds pressure to being an athlete. And I think of like all these, like the young women right now, student athletes who are just getting all this attention and all these NIL deals. Like it's so great and it's bringing so much awareness to women in sports. But it's also like, okay, these girls are 18 to 22. Like they're still trying to figure themselves out, figuring out their sexuality, like what they like to do outside of their sport, all of that stuff. Like there's just so much that goes on in their lives while they're also trying to like fit the view that everyone else has of them when they might not even have their own view of what.
Right. No, you just said a mouthful and a lot of.
Yeah, I did. I know.
Which is great. Which is great. Your perspective as a former athlete, now training to be a clinician and working with athletes and broadening, your ability to serve and help people is huge and essential and fantastic. It's great. I think that it's important to what you're saying. Any transition from high school to college, college to pros potentially, or college to international play, things like that. Any transition
out of the sport.
Yes, transitioning out of the sport. So athlete identity and like what that means. There's no loss that isn't important to process and look at, because the grief process is the same. It just might be less severe over here or more severe over there.
Yeah.
So the grief process still happens when you lose something. We're still going to feel a thing, and we're still going to go through those stages of grief, bargaining, depression, all of those. There's 5 to 7, depending on what source you're looking at, that in a transition, you were going to feel some sense of loss as you get ready for something really great as well. And that's a funny, interesting point, because the other part that I come across too with those transitions, especially from high school to college, is you're no longer the big dog anymore.
Yeah.
That loss of your role and the identity in your sport of like, I was all that, but like, I am now like, got to earn every minute and like earn my time, earn the attention of the coach, et cetera, is really, really a thing. I think that NIL and social media, there's positives and pros and cons to both.
Yeah.
And young athletes need to learn the skills of navigating both of these spaces. And so I don't want to throw social media all the way out, but with some management, some skills, some awareness of like what too much screen time does to you and your brain is important as you manage your space on that phone for that reason. NIL, exactly. How do you manage that opportunity or those opportunities for yourself or your team while not kind of getting too stressed out or pressured by it? Yeah. And it can happen, but it's got to be an intentional and overt and conscientious, consistent, comprehensive way to approach it.
Totally.
That doesn't like throw you off your game, literally and figuratively.
Yeah. I think those are all such important aspects of it, because we want to have that kind of like, for clinicians listening, maybe the DBT perspective of like the both and like we can't get rid of one thing and we want to enjoy the goods of both, but just figuring that out.
Totally.
Yeah. So I know we've talked a lot about different topics when it comes to mental health within sports, but are there any like myths out there when it comes to mental health in sports that you'd like to debunk or kind of want to get out there that this is the view, but this is kind of the reality?
Right. I mean, I think we've done a good job of naming some already. Like to talk about mental health means you're weak or sick. To go to therapy means that you are crazy, which we always want to stress the preventative approach. Like just, you don't have to be in crisis to try therapy.
Yeah.
That's another myth, I think. Like you can just say, hey, I just want another perspective. Sweet. I love that. As a therapist, I'm like, let's go. Like, okay. Yeah. Because like the deepest work actually happens outside of a crisis and outside of an urgent matter issue, because you have more.
Yeah. That's what I've kind of noticed with working with the students that I have right now. It's like, sometimes they come in like crying because there's some more severe cases, but I'll just use a more mild case for this. But like because a test was so hard, and they're like crying and they're like, I need help. I'm like, what I'm going to say to you right now is not going to stick. Like, that's just like, obviously I'm going to be here to support you, and like, hey, let's color to like kind of deactivate ourselves, but let's come back tomorrow and we can talk more about like, okay, how was that for you? How can we make that not happen again?
Right, right. What's the underlying insight that we can gain from how come we went down that road?
Yeah.
I mean, I think some of the other ones, I'm trying to think of other ones that come up like, oh, my therapist is just going to be yesing and knowing me,
Yeah.
like just sitting behind pad of paper and writing stuff about me. That comes from a real approach that is no longer, I think, relevant or applicable, especially to the athlete population. The blank slate, the more psychoanalytic standpoint. I think our media and TV and movies often don't portray our profession accurately. And so when people want to access it in real life, I think it's going to be that way. So the myth is that every therapist is going to be like, tell me, okay. Yeah. That's not true. And so there is such thing as an interactive therapist guided by different theories and approaches that are dictated by who is sitting in front of you. What do you think is going to be the best approach for them to get what they need to relate and build rapport and trust? Yeah. And so that needs assessment at the beginning of like starts with the first phone call, first email. How do we best make that connection so that our interactions and impact are the most optimal for the person sitting in front of you? So that's a myth that there is such thing as an interactive therapist.
And I also just want to put out there too, like that's so important for clinicians to be aware of, because, and for athletes to know that that is an approach, because we especially, I mean, again, this comes with everyone, but we're just focusing on the athlete community, but there are so many people of different backgrounds, different races, different ethnicities, different countries of origin. Like we can't just go like a therapist, me being white and a female, like I have to realize like the privilege that I might hold when working with like a Black athlete or someone from another country who might have these other ideas of mental health that are not like, they're not like, might not be so keen on mental health, but realizing that like that's their perspective and kind of like meeting them where they're at and they're not going to be judged for that. And just being like very aware and conscious of their lived experiences. And I think that's important because athletes, I feel like, are judged a lot in our profession, in our role, and whatever it is. And not all therapists will be that another judgmental space. I think that's important to name.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Like this is like in the therapy space, it's important for anyone entering into it to know that they get to be themselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's just a relief to
that's going to be celebrated.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't have to perform in therapy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of my athletes are like, okay, these are the three things I want. I'm like, okay, I dig that. There's a part of me that really digs that. And part of me is like, chill out. Just like you don't have to be prepared. You can be from time to time, but I don't want you to feel the pressure to like, I'm not using therapy productively if I don't come with like an agenda.
Yeah.
That's another myth.
Yeah.
That like you have to like prepare for it and perform and like show the good sides of you and da, da, da. I'm like, you do that all the time anyway.
Yeah.
Like this is a place for you to be anything else but that. If you want. In time, maybe sometimes early on, they don't get that. Yeah. Or like, is she really, really? Like, let me just feel her out a little bit more and then we can see. And I'm like, I get that. Everybody has to warm up to the space. I mean, I think that the diversity issue is a real big one. Like I prioritize the sort of development of Brown and Black practitioners in my company. So they have space to thrive and be in their skin and develop their craft and get the work that they want to get to work on. But I'm not naive to say that like, just because a Black athlete comes into AthMindset, they're going to want a Black therapist. Sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's one of the identities that people hold. Yeah. And sometimes that's really important. More often than not, in my experience, it's very important, but not assuming that. Letting the athletes say who they want to work with, gender, sexual orientation, lived experience in sport, what kind of sport did you play, what areas of expertise do you have, like just the vibe too. I think it's important for therapists and for athletes to know that therapists give free consultations, mostly. I'm not going to speak for all therapists out there, but like most give probably 10 to 30 minute, anywhere in that realm of like, let's vibe for a second. And to TBH, the therapist is also vibing.
Totally.
So it's a chance for mutual vibing to go on to see if the therapist is the best match for you and what you're going through and what you want support around and want to talk about. And then the athlete is also vibing, like, is this someone I can imagine myself opening up to? Mm-hmm. So mutual vibe session to see what the next steps can be. And the therapist will always give a referral if that's what it comes to. Yeah. And explore ways that like what those referrals could look like and like what vibe they want or what demographic they want.
Yeah.
So we treat, again, this is the theme of this talk, the athletes as humans. Mm-hmm. One, identity doesn't describe the holistic experience, and learning what identity is the most important to them and how that can translate into your relationship with the therapist. Mm-hmm. So
100%. So basically what we're saying is there is a therapist out there for everyone.
Yes. And to shop around. Yeah. That's another myth. Like, well, therapy sucks because this therapist didn't get me. Okay. I get that that's how it would feel, but I wouldn't want you to throw the baby out with the bathwater because the first experience, which I sometimes I'm like, but like totally get, didn't work for you or didn't feel good. Like, it's just like driving a car or buying a car. You got to go test drive it.
Yeah.
Totally. Do your research, right? Do your research. Like, check out all the amenities and like the add-ons and the different things in a car. Look at pricing. It's the same thing. You're a consumer when you are trying to buy a car in this instance. You're also a consumer when you choose a therapist. Mm-hmm. So asking all the questions that you need to ask and doing all the research that you need to do, and then come in and then vibe it. Test the therapist for 15, 20 minutes, whatever. Then you get to make a choice. There's no hard feelings. It's like, it's just what needs to happen. And I want, potential athletes who are pursuing a therapist relationship to feel like they can ask questions, that they can do the research, that they can say, I'm shopping around. Mm-hmm. Please say that.
Yeah.
We love that as therapists. Like, cool. That means you're dedicated and like interested in making this work for you and being the most positive experience possible. Totally. So love it. Like, ask me what you need to ask. Yeah. That's another myth, that we're a closed book. We're not supposed to like self-disclose. I'm like, hey, young bucks who are getting trained. That's usually kind of what has been told. But as you go through the years and many years like myself, you have to learn how to use yourself as a therapeutic tool. Be closed off is, in my experience, as I found, not the best way to engage. Right. There's exceptions to every rule. There's certain presentations, clinical presentations that don't allow for that, or like that's not the best clinical approach. But is it that the athlete needs that you're learning as you're doing your assessment over time? Like, how would that help to like share a little bit about yourself or answer a question? And then like, how is it like, did you play a sport is often a question. I would say, yeah, did you want me to say more about that? Or like, how would that help our connection? Yeah. Or like, how do you feel like that would be helpful for you to know as you dive into this work with me? Yeah. And so, because it's going to help, you're going to get it. Like, I'm not always going to get it, but that is a shared experience that we have.
Yeah. And so, like sometimes, most of the time, there's a lot of trust issues within it, whether it comes to coaches or like just the recruiting process, whatever it might be. So realizing that like your therapist or your performance coach, whoever it might be, is someone that you can trust and you like kind of know that you can relate on some level, in my opinion, makes the work so much more intentional and beneficial for the athlete or whichever client it might be.
You're leading me to another myth, Haley, in that, if I see you as my therapist, my coach is going to know everything that we talk about.
Ooh, yeah.
Right. And then thus not want to play me because they're going to see me as weak going to therapy.
Right. Yeah.
That's a huge one, right? It is illegal and unethical to share anything that I talk about or even who I'm seeing to anyone outside of the athlete. Yeah. Unless they're a minor and there's a consent process there where the parent has to sign. But I will not tell them without the young person's consent, verbally or written, to talk to the parent about anything we discuss.
Yeah.
And so at all levels, youth, collegiate, Olympic, professional, amateur, wherever, exercisers, I can't even say, like, if someone says, oh, my kid is supposed to have an appointment at this and this time, can you confirm? Like, I'd rather you confirm with them.
Yeah.
So because it's a parent, they're going to know that I'm in their lives, but those logistics are life skills too, for the young person to learn how to answer those questions and navigate with the parent.
Right.
I'm not here to take the parent's role or like enable a young person to not step up and take responsibility for their work.
Yeah. And also going back to like the coach's part, it's not your job to, or whoever's job, it's not the clinician's job to connect the coach and the player. Like, let's say it is like a team psychologist or team therapist, whatever it might be. Like, if a coach comes to you and asks, oh, how's this person doing? Like, that's not your job. Like, why don't you go talk to your player and see, like, create that bond and create clearly if you're thinking something is wrong with them, like, it would be a nice thing to check in on them. Like, I'm sure everyone would like that. And same for the athlete. Like, if you are having a problem with your coach, like, okay, maybe this is something you can approach them with, and how can we create the skills and empower you to do that, instead of like just thinking like, oh, I'm telling my therapist, they're going to tell the coach. Like, no,
Exactly.
that's not how it works.
So again, not only is that not the best, healthiest approach to equip and empower both the coach and the athlete, it's illegal.
Yeah.
Without proper consent signed. Sometimes my athletes say, yes, you can talk to my coach. And we'd say about these things only, like performance-based things only.
Yeah.
My childhood trauma, they don't need to know, and I don't want them to know. So we can sign particular consents about what is okay to talk about. But I'm always going to, yes, like you said, give like practice and train on the skills that it takes for the athlete to talk to the coach. And I have coaches that I work with. So as performance coaches and as a therapist, depending on what they're about, how they can be the most sort of athlete-centered, empowered coach they can be in this day and age, because coaching has changed. That could be a whole nother.
Yeah.
Coaching has changed for the good, in my opinion. Sometimes it's hard to let go of what was and how I was coached. So if I'm a coach and that's how I was coached, that's how I'm going to coach. I'm like, that's like me saying that's how I was parented, so I'm going to parent the same way. Like, what? Like,
that's not, yeah.
So like, I want some insight there and some like ability to have a growth mindset about like, okay, I understand this is what worked for me, but that doesn't mean it's always going to work for someone else. There's new approaches and new ways of perspectives about the sports psychology field, coaching now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that was so many myths. I'm sure we could go on for episodes, days of talking about all of it. But I think all of what you said was so amazing. And I know I've already learned so much more just coming out of this conversation. And I hope other people will too. But before we wrap it up, is there anything you want to get out before we end this episode?
No, I want to just appreciate you for having this platform. It's so important for athletes of all ages and all levels to be able to know that, mental health is something to consider and to build awareness around. And it's an okay thing to talk about. And like you as a former athlete, it's important, like people can hear this from you and your platform in a different way. And so I appreciate just everything that you're doing and everything you're doing to become a clinician that will serve and athletes moving forward. Like we need that. Our profession needs that. The athletes need it. The parents are yearning for it. And so as a parent, also like wanting and realizing that I can only do so much as a parent to my kids. I will bring in the professionals to help them in different areas if needed, just like a tutor.
Yeah.
Just like, a golf coach, because my son plays golf. Like, I'm not going to go out there and teach him golf. Like, I can teach him the mental aspect of it, but do I really want to? He's 9. So anyway, but like, it takes a village, as I say. I am one person. Let me stay in my role. And I would love other parents to feel like they can stay in theirs as well. And so knowing that all together, we can help this next generation, like become most healthy as possible in all realms. And so I just appreciate all that you're doing to uplift that and highlight it. And just thank you and appreciate you for spending time with me today.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to have you in my circle and to be able to have these conversations with you. So thank you so much.
AthMindset is part of the CASSource Podcast Network. At CASSource, we love podcasts. In fact, we love building podcasts, everything from development to production. Because of all that, we're growing this one-of-a-kind podcast network. If you have a podcast or looking to launch a new podcast, then we should talk. You can message me on Twitter at Eric_Kaz, or hit us up any way that works for you by searching CASSource on your social media app of choice. Let's talk about your podcast joining this one-of-a-kind podcast network, the CASSource Podcast Network.